to look at getting organized in PHP, and we shall make sure that we take advantage of OOP, or object-oriented programming, in order to pursue more organization in our PHP code. So what shall we cover in all this? We shall learn what OOP is. We shall learn about classes and objects. We shall learn about constructors, and we shall learn about constructors and destructor. We shall learn about access modifiers, inheritance, constants, abstract classes, interfaces, traits, static methods, namespaces, iterables. We are not going to learn all of these in today's session. We shall cover what we can and resume another session to cover the rest. So without further ado, let's get to know what OOP is. So OOP stands for Object-Oriented Programming. There are other types of programming like procedural programming, which is about writing procedures or functions that perform operations on data, while object-oriented programming is about creating objects that contain both data and functions. We shall look at the practicals to understand more. And why do we have to learn OOP? So we learn OOP because it has several advantages. It is faster and easier to execute. It provides a clear structure for programs or the code you write, and it helps to keep the PHP code dry. Dry stands for don't repeat yourself, and makes the code easier to maintain and modify and debug. So don't repeat yourself. If I'm to talk more about it, it's like, imagine you have a calculator, or imagine you are programming a calculator, and you are programming these functions like the addition, subtraction, division, so on and so forth. These functions will be taking in things like numbers. Now, if they are taking in numbers, it means you are going to write a lot of functions, and you are going to make them accept a lot of parameters, and you might repeat some code in those functions. So in OOP, we ensure that our classes are standard, in that they help us reuse code as opposed to rewriting the same function or the same code over and over. Of course, procedural programming also helps us not to over repeat ourselves, to write code that is maintainable, but OOP takes it a step further. OOP makes it possible to create full reusable applications with less code and shorter development time, because you're gonna get this class, create objects out of it, or create your object and inherit another object, and then be able to access all the functionalities from the underlying object. And that means you save a lot of time. Think of this as those of you who have worked with React, JavaScript, you've used things like packages. Now, those packages, you are able to use them because they have been developed in a way that they are extendable. And the OOP is the only feature or the only programming paradigm that allows you to pick features, to inherit features from another class to another class. So that's why it makes it easily possible to create full reusable applications. And so what is the anatomy of OOP? So in short, I say that in OOP we have two fundamental things. We have the class and we have the object. Now, classes are templates. if you don't know what the term templates mean, I can say that they are blueprints. They are like a strategy. They are like a plan for coming up with something. So whereas objects are the things or technically instances made out of classes. So without classes you cannot have objects. If we relate to a house plan, people who do not have house plans will never make a house that is properly made. Usually you need a house plan to measure the surface area, to know where the house will face, how many windows, how many doors, what's its height, how many floors, things like that. What sort of floor will it have? What sort of roof will it have? So all of these are relate to classes, and classes left the foundation for how objects will be designed. So if you look at this example that I've shared here, we can have a class called human being, and from the human being we can have an instance called Fanny, we can have another instance called Caroline, we can have another instance called David, another one called Henry, another one called Peter. Now this is a high level diagram, but if we try to demystify it or break it down, what will happen is that Fanny has data and behavior. So Fanny has attributes and behavior. Caroline the same thing, David the same thing, Henry the same thing, Peter the same thing. So what will happen in this scenario is that some of the attributes Fanny has is a name, which is Fanny Nyaichi. Then Caroline is the same thing. Fanny has an age, Fanny has a height. All of those are attributes. But then Fanny has functionalities like speaking functionality, walking functionality, eating, all of those are the behaviors. So these are the things that OOP helps us to do or to implement. All right, so let's do it. Let's implement a human being class after all of that theory and create some objects out of it. So I'll straight up go open VS Code, and here I'll open the command line or the terminal, and I've cleared the way. Then I'll create a file called human being. These files usually of the classes, I can even call it human. I usually start them with capital letters. Alright, so I'll enter and the file has been created. In here we are going to make sure we don't have HTML code. So I'll collapse this to give us some maintainable area. And when you are creating a class, the syntax is simple. Remember we said that what makes OOP are two things. Those are the classes and the objects. And we said that classes are the plans for objects. So that means that we start by creating classes. Of course, if you are building something like, if you are building following the TDD principles, you may start with implementing the objects or instantiating objects and work backwards, so that by the time you finish you have a fully tested application. But we are not going through that procedure. So let me start, and the syntax, we use a keyword class, then we define the class name, we put brackets, open and closing brackets. That's how we create a class in PHP. And then we put the properties, just a moment, we put properties, and methods. Okay, of course there are certain things we have to add to the properties and methods, but that shouldn't really concern us at this early stage. All right, and I forgot the PHP tag, which is totally wrong. I had to put the opening PHP tag here, and thanks God I've corrected that. So now we can start creating our class. So to create a class, use the keyword class, write the class name, which can be human, and do that. So if now this is the plan, and if we try to view this via the browser, we shall totally see nothing. Now we can try to add attributes to this class. For example, we can try to add things like the name, we can define the name, so on and so forth. So to do that, we can just say name as the property, and then we can set it to some, we can set it to something like nothing, and then we can see. So they are showing us here that there is an error, and the error should be the way I'm creating this, the way I'm creating that property in a class. The properties for classes are not entirely created that way in OOP. They are not created like, just a moment, they are not created just like the way we create them in a normal code. So what we are going to do in this case, I'll put something here like public, then I won't assign, I won't initialize it, I'll do something like that, then save. You see the error has gone away. Now if I want to assign it to this, I'll come up with something that can assign, and this something that can assign must be a behavior or a functionality where you have to use the function keyword, and I can say it can be set name, and it will take in a name. Then as it's taking in the name as its parameter, this name has nothing to do with this unless we associate it here. So to associate the name, this one to this one, we shall use the keyword this, put an arrow and write name. This one is accessing this, then we shall say equals to name. Now the name we are talking about in this case is this one, that's the one here. So now when we do something like this, I can see there is an error. It's because I forgot the semicolon over here. So when we do something like this, we can say this is the plan for the human, that the human blueprint has a name property, and it also has the way the name property is set. So it has a setter for the name property. Okay, now we can say let's try that out. And how can we try that out? We can go to PHP in the command line and write human.php. You can see we are seeing nothing, simply because we have a blueprint, but we are not using the blueprint. Okay, we are not using the blueprint. That's really something that we need to do. And how are we going to do that? We can come over here and say using the class or template, and say here, and up here we can say defining the template or the class, whatever you want to call it. So we can come up this here and create our variable that is going to be initialized with a human. So in this case, we may want a variable called Fanny, and we say equals to human, like that, equals to new human. The new keyword is important, and this means that we've now created an instance, and the instance is Fanny. It is storing an instance that has been created by this plan. All right, so let's continue. Let's go forward. And how are we going to do it? Now, if we test this, we shall still see nothing, because we've created, but we've not yet set the name. So how can we set the name? To set the name, we are going to access this variable here, which is a function, in a special way. What is that way? We shall use our variable and use that arrow again. Then we shall write the set name. And we are saying that on the object called Fanny, get the name, and the name, set the name, but remember the name takes an argument. So we have to put an argument there, which is Fanny Nyaj. And do that. And then if we do something, still we are not going, if we test, we are not going to see anything. Okay, we are not going to see anything because we are not outputting. This function or behavior just set the name, and it set the name to this. Now for us to see the name, we can echo Fanny, the arrow, then the name. So we can now test, and you see Fanny has been output at the terminal, Fanny Nyaichi. So the nice thing about this is that now we can go on creating more objects, more and more objects. How? I can duplicate this code and create Henry, and then say, even here I would say Henry, and then I say Henry Onyango. Then I would write here Henry, and save. So if I run, I expect to see two names. Yeah, Fanny Nyaichi and Henry Onyango. Of course, they are happening on the same. They are appearing on the same line because I did not put anything like a line breaker, and so I need to put it. Of course, in things you are going to see on the command line, you can't use the BR. The BR is interpreted in the browser, not in the command line. So this is it. You can see that we have Henry and Fanny. Okay, before we proceed, let's recap. I'll close the terminal. So we've looked at the syntax of creating the class. We've said you use the class keyword, then any name you want to identify your class with. Then you write the properties and the methods. Now, the properties are the variables that are inside a class, and the methods are all the functions that are inside a class. However, you've seen this name here, this keyword here, the public, which I know that you don't know what it means, but we shall look at it further. All right, we shall look at it further. Now we need, okay, before even I go to the next step, now we went ahead and looked at how to use the class. And we said that we derive all instantiate objects from the class by creating a variable and assigning the object to the class. We assign the class to the variable, and we use the new keyword together with the class name, and we add the parenthesis on the class name. Then we start accessing the properties and the methods of the object we've created by using this special symbol, which is an arrow, and then specifying either the property or the method. In this case, we've specified the method called setName. All right, so that's how things can be. We can continue by using a getter function, which will be getName. And what this getter is going to do, you see, it's different from the setter because we are going to get a name that has already been set. So we shall just, from this function or method, we shall just return this arrow name. Like I said, the keyword this helps you to access the properties and the methods in the current class. So if I say this, it is referring to human. So I would have written something. There's another syntax we can use, like human and this then name, like that, but we shall look at that syntax later. You know, so we've now said this method or behavior, this is referred to as a method or behavior, or what other people can call functionality. Then this one is also called the same. This one is also called the same. Then this one over here is called a property. So you see, the class really does nothing, but its methods and the properties are the ones that do things. So now with this, we can output the name using this get. How? We can define a new class here. We can call this class David equals to new human, and we can say David equals no, not David, sorry, yeah, no, not equals, sorry. So David arrow set name to David Anur, and we terminate the statement. Then we can echo the new line so that we can break this from the previous line. And here we can echo get name, not like that. We can echo David get name. So let's now go to the terminal and see what is gonna happen. Undefined variable name. Excuse me, on which line? Line 20. So here, undefined variable name. So I made a mistake there. I need to do this and then to remove. Yeah, I think this will work. So clear here. Then you see that, so David Anuru is here, and for him the name has been output by this behavior. So the function, which means that the human class we have has a behavior of setting a name and has a behavior of returning the name, and it has a property of the name. So that's it for this session. We are going to look at more things like if I go back here, we shall look at more things like we've briefly looked at classes versus objects, but we shall look at constructor, destructor, access modifiers, so on and so forth in other tutorials or in other sessions. So see you in the next video, and if you are new to my channel, kindly subscribe and share, and if you have any questions, write them in the comment box. I'll be able to answer them. So thank you.